Audiobook The Mirror Principle, written and voiced by Reinhard. Why did you pick up this book? Before we dive in, let me ask you this. Why are you here? The more specifically you can answer that question, the more valuable this book will be for you. Take a moment to think about it. I'll explain while you do. This isn't a book for beginners, and I want to be upfront about that. However, based on what I've seen on my channel, the most popular content I've shared happens to be on this very subject. So, I know many of you are at least somewhat familiar with it. Still, let me warn you, this principle isn't easy to apply. You may find yourself revisiting this book multiple times to fully grasp its depth. The topic is vast and can take years to fully unfold in your life. But don't worry, this process will happen in the background as you continue with your daily routine, just like it did for me. The important thing is to allow this principle to begin working in your life, even if it's slow at first. Let's take a look at some of the questions you've been leaving in the comments. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at linreinhardt@gmail.com or leave them in the comments under this video. Here's a comment from Catherine. I want to get rid of the negativity coming from my father, his constant remarks about the mess around us, gossiping about neighbors I don't know and don't care about, and distracting me with trivial things. I also want to use the mirror principle to learn how to set my boundaries more effectively without hurting others in the process. Or a question from Susan. I'm here for the mechanics of the mirror principle. And here's another one. I want to understand myself better through the world around me. I'm interested in learning how to effectively apply the mirror principle in my own life. A question from Natalia. Natalia, let me address your question. You're using some very abstract language here. I encourage you to think more deeply about this, not for my sake, but for your own. The more clearly you can answer the question, why did you pick up this book? The greater your chance of getting something meaningful out of it. This isn't just about gaining knowledge or discovering something interesting. It's about finding something that can truly make a difference in your life. That's why I'm being particular about the way you phrase things. Not because I need the perfect wording, but because you need to clarify for yourself, why is this important to me? Here are a few more questions. I've been practicing the principle already. Maybe I'll learn some new techniques and insights. Or, I follow the mirror principle, but I sometimes struggle. I'm interested in seeing your perspective. Here's a question from Morgan. I want to learn how to apply this principle for myself. I've been practicing it by identifying what irritates me in others, then reflecting on how that trait might be present in me and working to change it. But sometimes it's hard to recognize or accept these things about myself. Another question. I want to manage my life by understanding myself and my reactions to what's happening around me. Victoria writes, I listened to your previous book on the principle, but I want to know how to apply it in real life. And finally, I have a difficult relationship with people close to me. It feels like what annoys me in them is what I can't relate to at all, but you say it's the opposite. I want to learn how to recognize what's mine in others, how to see it, and how to deal with it. I thought I had already provided enough information about the mirror principle in my previous book. There's even an entire chapter dedicated to it in the first section. However, given the sheer number of questions I continue to receive on this topic, I decided to write another book focused specifically on the mirror principle and its application. Based on the feedback I've received, some people have heard of it and are successfully using it, while others are still struggling to understand or apply it.so. The mirror principle works for everyone all the time. The challenge lies in influencing others and events through this mirror effect. In other words, your experiences are always a reflection of you, but not everyone is able to effectively leverage this reflection to create change. The mirror principle is the phenomenon that occurs in your life when the behavior of others and external events reflect what is happening within you. The act of influencing people and events through this phenomenon is what I call the technique of reverse reflection. So, what's the catch? The catch is that to effectively apply reverse reflection, you need to have a solid grasp of your consciousness and a deep understanding of how mirroring works. Most people lack both. Many struggle with their consciousness, allowing it to control their lives, and they don't truly understand the concept of mirroring. As a result, for the majority of those who have heard of the mirror principle, it remains a topic for casual discussions about spirituality, often seen as mere esoteric nonsense. There are those who genuinely try to apply it, but find that it doesn't seem to work. It sounds good in theory, but when faced with real life situations and actual people, emotions can overwhelm you, making it difficult to see the mirroring effect, and even more so, to manage IT to effectively use reverse reflection through the mirror principle. You need to 1. Understand how mirroring works and how consciousness operates, at least in relation to mirroring. 2. Learn to manage these aspects effectively. Once you've done the preparatory work, using reverse reflection becomes quite simple. That's why we'll discuss the technique of reverse reflection at the end, and it won't take up much time. However, I will spend the majority of our time talking about what you need to understand and how to effectively manage your consciousness. First, we will explore consciousness and mirroring, and then we'll move on to the technique of reverse reflection. We'll discuss how to apply it and address some of the nuances involved. We'll also tackle challenging questions, such as why do things reflect back to me that seem to be minimal within myself? This is important to cover because it's where many people struggle the most. Let's start by understanding what consciousness is and how it works. We won't dive too deeply into its complexities, as our time is limited and the topic of consciousness could easily take hours to explore. Instead, we'll cover the key points. If you're interested in delving deeper, I encourage you to seek out additional literature on the subject. What is consciousness? It's often said, by both psychologists and spiritual masters, that the entire world reflects within the mirror of your consciousness. From this, we can infer that there's no singular consciousness or model of reality that we all share. What does this mean? In truth, we are all different and perceive the world in unique ways. It may seem like we see the world the same way, but in reality, each of us lives in our own universe and experiences a completely distinct reality. When I first heard this concept, I decided to conduct an experiment because I don't take things at face value. At that time, I was practicing various energy techniques in my apartment, and my students who started training with me in martial arts had gradually progressed to psychological Aikido. While studying psychology, I encountered these ideas and began experimenting. I had a picture of a Japanese garden hanging in my kitchen. I would invite each of my students, about 10 in total, to come over and look at the picture. After they observed it for a moment, I'd lead them away, grab a recorder, and ask, "What did you see in the picture?" To my surprise, each of the 10 students described the painting completely differently. This confirmed the theory for me and demonstrated it in practice. One person mentioned the beautifully arranged stones, another admired the blooming cherry blossoms, and someone else talked about the stream with a bridge. Not a single person described the picture as a whole. Instead, each described what resonated with them. This is true in everyday reality as well. We don't perceive reality in its entirety. We only see the parts that resonate with us. Here's another example. Consider what a tourist perceives in your city compared to what you notice as you walk down the same street on your way to work. A tourist may be captivated by the beauty of the buildings, while someone rushing to work might hardly notice their surroundings or appreciate the beauty of their own city. This illustrates how we each perceive our unique model of reality. If you were to ask a psychologist, what is consciousness? A scientific definition might be something like, consciousness is the activity of the conscious part of the mind, encompassing what can be understood and verbalized. However, this definition merely distinguishes between the conscious and the subconscious and fails to truly answer the question, what is consciousness? Consciousness cannot be examined outside the characteristics of the individual and their interaction with the environment. A more accurate formulation, in my view, comes from quantum physics and enlightened masters like Eckhart Tolle. They define consciousness as not an object, but rather a space in which all reality is reflected, reality that is created and observed by the observer, who is merely a part of that consciousness. I understand this might be a bit challenging to grasp, but as you reread or listen to this, I encourage you to ponder it deeply. This can be illustrated by comparing consciousness to a room. Imagine that our consciousness is like the space of a room. Within this space, there are various objects, furniture, paintings, and different items. However, the room only exists when someone is observing it, looking at it, and seeing those objects. We'll explore how this works in the paradoxes of dual perception later on. For now, consider this. Consciousness is not merely me as an object. Rather, consciousness is the space in which this world is reflected. I'd like to draw your attention to the properties of consciousness. How can we define what consciousness is? What are its key properties? One of the fundamental properties is the ability to perceive and record, remember, information. Even material objects like stones and crystals possess this basic level of consciousness. They can perceive and record information, which allows for various readings of that information. The second property of consciousness is the ability to differentiate. This quality is present in plants, which can distinguish where there is water and extend their roots toward it. Plants also turn their leaves toward the light. This indicates that they not only perceive and record information, but they also differentiate it and somehow model it within their consciousness. Next is the property of interacting with the environment and among species. Animals possess this higher quality of consciousness. They band together in groups for survival and to navigate the world more effectively. Another important property is self-awareness, the recognition of oneself in life, the awareness of I am. Scientists say that only humans possess this level of consciousness. You may know the example of fighting fish. When they see their reflection in an aquarium, they don't recognize themselves. They perceive the reflection as something opposite and attack it. Similarly, you might have seen cats playing with mirrors. They see their reflection and start to play with it, unaware that it is actually them. Therefore, the self-awareness of I am is unique to humans. These are the properties that characterize our consciousness. These properties of consciousness come with levels of self-awareness, meaning there are boundaries and limitations to our consciousness. These limitations affect how fully we assimilate into life and how completely we perceive ourselves. Let's say the most basic level of consciousness is I am my body. At this level, a person completely identifies with their physical body and focuses solely on its needs. This is a more primal level of existence, where consciousness is entirely centered on the body and its survival needs. While very few people operate at this level today, it can still dominate some individuals. Importantly, these levels of consciousness are not fixed. A person can generally function at a higher level, but occasionally regress to the I am my body state. For example, if you're in pain or have experienced a physical injury, your consciousness may narrow to focus solely on that pain, and you become fully absorbed in the sensations of your body. In such moments, other levels of consciousness fade away, and you perceive only the pain, becoming entirely focused on your physical state. The next level is I am my desires. You probably know people who are completely focused on their desires and the wants of their bodies. Their entire lives revolve around the constant, unending satisfaction of these desires. Moving up the gradient, we have I am my qualities and my social roles. Many individuals become so identified with their social roles, for example, I am a general, that they perceive life solely through that lens of consciousness. They completely identify with this role, interpreting and experiencing the world from the perspective of that identity. Another level of consciousness is I am my emotions, feelings, and states. This occurs when a person is entirely absorbed in their emotional experiences, feelings, or the states they find themselves in. A specific example of this state is when someone is deeply depressed. In such a case, the person is consumed by their feelings of depression, and the world is experienced solely through that limited state of consciousness. The next level is I am my experiences, my beliefs, and how I express those beliefs in the world. Most unconscious individuals operate at this level of consciousness. They hold certain beliefs deep within their subconscious and live according to them. These beliefs are often rigid and change very rarely. For instance, if someone was taught from childhood that things must be a certain way, they will defend those beliefs for the rest of their lives, arguing and insisting that this is the only way things can be. Moving up again, we arrive at I am my thoughts. This level of consciousness encompasses the ability to think logically and intuitively. It allows individuals to create new mental models, leading to fresh perceptions and understandings of the world. Here, consciousness expands as one learns to navigate and interpret the world more fluidly through thoughtful reflection and intuitive processing of information. The final level of consciousness is I am pure consciousness, meaning the observer of the space of consciousness itself, free from any identification with what manifests within it. In this state, I simply observe what occurs in my consciousness. This pure consciousness is characteristic of enlightened beings, or, as they are often referred to, realized masters like Eckhart Tolle and the Buddha. These individuals have reached a state of enlightenment or profound, total awareness. There are various levels of consciousness, and the level from which we perceive the world can significantly limit our conscious space. For example, when we are at a lower level of consciousness, such as when experiencing pain, our entire focus narrows to that sensation. Nothing exists beyond our pain and our body. Similarly, if we are consumed by a passionate desire, our perception becomes confined to that desire, and we only notice information related to fulfilling it. Consciousness can expand when you rise to a higher level, and it can contract when you descend to a lower level. It's like a gradient. This system is dynamic, meaning you can elevate your consciousness and broaden your awareness, or you can narrow it based on circumstances. When your consciousness contracts, less information flows through it, often limited to the specific level you're currently experiencing. I wish I were in a live session right now. It would be interesting to see how well the information resonates with you. Please let me know in the comments how clear everything is for you. Now, let's talk about what makes up our consciousness. Consciousness consists of various components, such as the unconscious. This includes our instincts, reflexes, and automatic processes related to bodily functions. The unconscious encompasses everything that operates on autopilot, things we don't have direct awareness of. For instance, we don't consciously track what's happening in our intestines. They just function. Often, our reactions occur instinctively. If a dog suddenly runs at us, we might instinctively start running or jump over a fence without even realizing it. These processes happen in our unconscious, which is a part of our overall consciousness, but remains inaccessible to our conscious awareness. The subconscious. Think of this as an internal storage server that holds vast amounts of information we perceive. Scientists have conducted experiments showing that we process around 1 trillion bits of information every second. That's an enormous amount of data. However, our conscious mind can only process about 16 to 64 bits at a time. The majority of the information slips past our conscious awareness and goes straight into the storage of our subconscious. So, how did scientists come to these conclusions? This phenomenon is particularly evident in hypnosis. When a person is placed in a hypnotic state, they may be guided back to a specific memory and ask questions like, "What do you see?" The person might respond, "I see a room," and then, "There are bookshelves." The hypnotist might prompt further, "Look at those shelves. Read the titles on the spines of the books." At that moment, As the person focuses their attention with the help of the hypnotist, they begin to read what's written on the book spines. In their normal state of consciousness, they might not have noticed those details at all. However, our perception operates like a film, continuously recording information that goes straight into the archive of the subconscious. In a hypnotic state, individuals can pause this film and access details they didn't consciously register before, as ordinary consciousness only operates through a narrow channel. This narrow focus is managed by a part of our brain called the reticular formation. The reticular formation is a delicate network that envelopes our brain, and it plays a crucial role in determining what information we perceive from the vast amount of data around us. Another common example illustrates this point well. Imagine someone tells you that your partner is cheating on you in a specific room at an art museum. What will you perceive when you visit that museum? What will your mind be focused on? Will you notice the beautiful artwork around you? Or will everything blur into the background as you search for where your partner might be cheating? This scenario highlights how our consciousness can be tuned to specific thoughts and emotions, often at the expense of the broader experience around us. When our mind is consumed by certain ideas or worries, it limits our ability to see and appreciate the beauty that exists right in front of us. I want to convey how narrow our perception of consciousness can be, while reality is much broader than what we typically perceive. This limited perception doesn't disappear. Instead, it gets archived in our subconscious, which we can access, unlike the unconscious. We cannot tap into the unconscious with our conscious mind, but we can access the subconscious by using various techniques. This distinction is key. The subconscious is accessible, while the unconscious remains out of reach. Consciousness refers to the information that flows through our awareness. It's the conscious data we perceive, analyze, and can articulate. I'd also like to point out that individual consciousness, seeing oneself as a system, is a subsystem of the collective consciousness of humanity. This is an interconnected concept that we need to unpack, especially when we delve into the nuances of quantum physics, where many ideas may seem abstract. For instance, when we say, "When my consciousness fades, the world disappears," many people might disagree, thinking, "But if I die, the world continues to exist." However, as I mentioned earlier, your unique perception of the world indeed ceases to exist. At a quantum level, we are all interconnected, and our individual realities are shaped by this collective consciousness. This collective experience is what ultimately informs and enriches our own awareness. For over 200 years, our understanding of the world and life has been shaped by classical physics, heavily influenced by Isaac Newton's work. Classical physics describes the world as perceived by our senses: trees in the sky, cars and buildings, work and family. However, not everything in our lives can be seen, heard, or tasted. There are phenomena that are too vast or too minuscule for our perception, such as the enormous swirling of galaxies in the depths of space and energy emissions at the atomic level. These realms influence us just as much, if not more, than what happens in our families or workplaces. If someone believes otherwise, it may reflect their inability to expand their consciousness and a desire to bury their head in the sand. We perceive the world not only through our senses. The universe is much deeper. We cannot see emotions, but we feel them. It's impossible to weigh a thought, yet thoughts significantly impact us. There are not only physical, visible objects. There are also those that elude our sensory perception but still exist and exert a strong influence on us. Take quantum physics, for instance, which investigates life beyond the reach of our senses. Recent discoveries are astounding and flirt with mysticism. It's fascinating that the foundational discoveries of quantum physics were made in the early 20th century, yet we still know very little about them. Access to this information is limited because it has the potential to radically change people's consciousness, making it much harder to control them. Those in power are likely resistant to this, as many things would be perceived differently, potentially leading to significant revenue losses for various corporations. Recent findings in microbiology suggest that individuals can heal themselves and even cure others, backed by scientific research. Imagine if this information became widely known. People might stop relying on pharmaceuticals, rendering many medical fields obsolete. As a result, this information remains closely guarded, accessible only to a select group of specialists. These discoveries are indeed on the brink of the fantastic. Quantum mechanics reveals that by merely observing an event, we at least influence that event and its outcome. One of the most famous experiments in quantum mechanics illustrates this: the double slit experiment. This experiment showed that the simple act of observing electrons affects their behavior. When electrons are not being observed, they behave like waves. However, as soon as they are observed, they act like particles. This indicates that in the absence of consciousness, there exist only infinite waves of possibilities. It's the observing consciousness that collapses these possibilities into a defined reality. Here's a simple question to ponder. Does a tree falling in the forest make a sound if there's no one around to hear it? Play with this thought, as it opens up countless possibilities. There might be no sound at all. What if a deaf person is present when the tree falls? Or if someone is deeply lost in thought? Will there still be sound? The possibilities are endless, and it's you, as the observer, who creates your own interpretation of the event. This concept can be illustrated with various examples. For instance, my father was born and raised in Uzbekistan, where the language lacks a specific word for the color blue. In their language, KOK means green. As a result, an entire culture perceives blue not as a distinct color, but rather as a shade of green. I've noticed that in Uzbekistan, the color turquoise is immensely popular. It's the go-to color for fences, gates, and homes. This blending of blue and green reflects the absence of a separate term for blue in their language, demonstrating how linguistic perception can shape our understanding of the world. Our consciousness is built upon a foundation of collective awareness. For instance, if a culture lacks a word for a specific color, like blue, then the individuals in that culture may not perceive that color in the same way. In Uzbekistan, for example, the language has no distinct term for blue. Instead, they use KOK, which translates to green. As a result, people in that culture might not recognize blue as a separate color. They see it as a shade of green. This cultural perspective influences their preferences, making shades like teal particularly popular for things like fences and houses. So, if blue does not exist in the collective consciousness of a society, it won't be recognized in an individual's consciousness either. This illustrates how our individual perception is uniquely shaped, yet deeply intertwined with the collective consciousness around us. It's a complex concept that merits reflection because it challenges how we understand our own individual experiences and perceptions. I'd like to address some of your questions from the comments, particularly one that I found intriguing. I have complicated relationships with my close ones, and it seems that what bothers me is actually what's far removed from me. You suggest otherwise. How can I understand that this is indeed mine, and how can I influence it? This can be illustrated through the concept of vibration. All the information we perceive can be thought of as vibrations or waves of different frequencies. Everything, light, color, even tactile sensations, can be seen as waves within certain ranges. We experience these vibrations through our senses, which send signals to our brain. The brain then processes these signals, creating our perceptions of sight, smell, and touch. Essentially, we're dealing with waves. From a scientific perspective, perception in our consciousness can be understood as resonance. If we resonate with something, we perceive it. If there's no resonance, it doesn't exist for us in that moment. This leads us to an important conclusion. We cannot perceive what we don't resonate with. This applies to our close relationships as well. When you feel irritated by something that seems distant, it's likely that you are unable to connect with it on a personal level. I would compare a person to a television. We are surrounded by a multitude of waves, but a TV only picks up signals for which it's tuned. Similarly, we, like a television, perceive these waves, process them, and project them outward. We operate on the same principle. We can only perceive, process, and express what we are attuned to. If we are tuned into sexual energy, we will notice and engage with information related to that. If we are attuned to art, we will perceive the world through an artistic lens. It's crucial to understand that without resonance, we cannot perceive anything in our environment. Resonance can occur not just at the level of consciousness, but also with information stored in our subconscious. This is often the key to why certain feelings or reactions seem distant or hard to understand. For instance, you might feel happy in content, yet notice irritation around you, such as people arguing on the bus. This indicates that while you are in a good mood, subconscious programs linked to irritation may be activating without your awareness. You might not recognize it yet, but that irritation is beginning to accumulate. There are a few key points I want to draw your attention to. They can easily be overlooked, but they are crucial. The first point is the limitation of consciousness and the identification of consciousness. Andrew explained beautifully how consciousness can manifest and what it can be identified with. Consciousness can be tied to your body, your desires, your social roles, your emotions and states, your beliefs and experiences, and your perceptions and thoughts. This identified state of consciousness is the norm for most people. It represents a standard way of living if we aren't aiming for an enlightened state. Unless you're a Buddha, you likely find yourself in an identified state, associating yourself with something. What is the practical application of this information? Why is it critically important to understand? How can we track this? And for what purpose? Every time something triggers you, or when someone affects you, that resonance occurs with one of your identifications of consciousness. In other words, you can be influenced through your body, desires, social roles, and emotions. It's impossible to influence consciousness in isolation. If your consciousness is disidentified, then it cannot be influenced. This is what Andrew referred to as pure consciousness or the observer. When you are in this state, no one can affect you. Any influence on you, any situation where you get hooked or where you experience emotions manipulated by someone else, always stems from an identified state of consciousness. You are identified with something, which is why you can be affected in that moment. For example, if you identify with the role of being intelligent, you may fear appearing foolish or hesitate to ask a question, making you susceptible to influence. Someone might say, any intelligent person understands that whatever follows will resonate with your identification as an intelligent person, and you may accept it without question. This is a classic manipulative technique that appeals to one of your identifications. This is the first point that needs to be clearly understood. Right now, I'm speaking on a grounded level, focusing on the concept of mirroring and the identification of consciousness in the context of influence, how you affect the external world and how it affects you. This is certainly not the only level or effect that this practice offers. Beyond learning how to influence others and resist outside influences, this practice significantly clears your mind and greatly contributes to the development of your consciousness, awareness, inner peace, and the observer state. However, one of the key components is the ability to track what you identify with and understand through which identification you are being influenced. Right now, I'm not suggesting that you should detach from your identifications, but rather that you need to observe them. Let me clarify. Observing your identifications is, in fact, the process of detachment. When you observe your identification, You cease to be fully identified with it. This is crucial. When you are completely identified, you often don't even notice it. It's similar to someone with schizophrenia or a dissociative identity disorder. They may not realize that something is amiss. They fully believe they are someone else. The same goes for identification. When you are completely identified, you are fully engulfed in that emotion. Imagine a child who is crying or throwing a tantrum. They're entirely identified in that moment. Or think of a professional woman expressing a strong emotion. She feels, with every fiber of her being, that she absolutely needs that sweater. She is completely identified with that desire and feeling. However, when you start to notice your identification, you are no longer 100% identified with it. The more you observe these identifications, the less you are attached to them, because once you begin to observe them, they become external objects. The second point I want to emphasize in this section is that resonance can occur with both the conscious and subconscious mind. I really want you to pay attention to this because many people overlook it. I illustrated this well with an example. When you're in a good mood, yet suddenly you start to notice someone around you arguing, shouting, or using foul language. You may not see a direct reflection of this in your conscious mind. There's nothing in your immediate awareness that relates to it. But in your subconscious, these reactions can be triggered or activated. These signs indicate subconscious resonance. In other words, external situations can resonate not just with our conscious mind, but also with our subconscious. Many people don't realize this, which is why the mirror principle doesn't work for them. They only search for resonance with their conscious mind while ignoring the resonance with their subconscious, which is very much present. Now, let's examine the state or quality of consciousness, as it varies among individuals. The quality of one's consciousness directly influences their level and quality of life, and these aspects are deeply interconnected. The first state of consciousness is unconsciousness. How is it characterized? It resembles a zombie-like state, an entirely reactive consciousness. This is marked by automatic responses to external stimuli and circumstances. Have you seen the movie The Matrix? It can be compared to how people live within the matrix, completely immersed in it, responding automatically. For instance, if someone pinches you, you reflexively swat their hand away. That's an automatic reaction. Most people on Earth live this way. There are specific patterns and stereotypes that are ingrained in us from childhood, often modeled after our parents' behavior. Automatically and without thought, we respond based on these ingrained programs. For example, if my partner raises her voice at me, I automatically start shouting back. This reaction is automatic because my voice was raised first. If someone calls me an idiot, I instantly feel offended or begin to argue that I'm not an idiot. In this way, I become emotionally entangled, reacting without awareness. This ties in well with the concepts of identified and non identified consciousness. You automatically identify with your emotions and reactions. This quality of consciousness, unconsciousness, is where most people reside. They go through life on autopilot, reacting to various circumstances, and later wonder, why does my life feel so terrible? Why is everything going wrong? This happens because of these automatic responses. In this state, life is lived unconsciously. If you want to change your life and your reality, you need to elevate to the next quality of consciousness, awareness. What does this state entail? When you are aware, you gain the gift of choice for the first time. At the level of unconsciousness, a person lacks freedom of choice. It's crucial to understand this. The great gift from God, freedom of choice, is absent for an unconscious person. They do not utilize this gift. Only a conscious person can exercise freedom of choice. This means that decisions are made not based on what is moral or immoral, ethical or unethical. Instead, we consider effectiveness or ineffectiveness. When faced with a stimulus, you step into awareness, analyze how to respond to this impulse, and then consciously react. For example, if my partner is shouting due to an emotional outburst, instead of yelling back, I enter a state of awareness and consider whether it's beneficial to shout. No, it's not beneficial, as it leads to arguments, stress, and a host of consequences. So I make a conscious choice that is effective for me. While she is upset and crying, I approach her, hug her, and whisper, "Yes, I understand this is tough, but I still love you. You are wonderful. I know circumstances are challenging, but what can we do? I love you regardless." Do you see how the freedom of choice can radically transform our lives? What characterizes awareness? It is the ability to make choices and consciously shape your reality through thought and action. In this state, we make conscious choices, mindfully assess situations, act in accordance with our decisions. A great illustration of this is from The Matrix, where Neo learns to navigate the Matrix by making his own choices. He can now enter or exit the Matrix as he desires, moving in his circumstances of his choosing. You might think of it this way: I exist within the Matrix and encounter a specific situation, but I can step out, reflect on it, and then return to a different Matrix where the situation has changed, thus altering my life through intentional action. The next state is presence. How does this differ from awareness? Presence is characterized by a disidentification with what is. In this state, manipulation becomes impossible. It's often described as a state of being present, like that of an observer. Very few people exist in this state. At this level, individuals create reality not through action, but through their will and intention. Consider this deeply. If you've read about the lives of enlightened beings, you'll notice they often engage in what is termed action through non-doing. These individuals influence reality by manifesting their will and intention. This intention is what transforms reality. In the Matrix, there is a moment when Neo reconnects with the source. He approaches the machine and states, "I want peace." Here, he aligns with the source and gains immense power to alter reality. He returns to face Agent Smith, an adversary of seemingly limitless strength, and ultimately triumphs. There is another complex state of consciousness, but it can only be recognized once you step out of it and into a reflective mindset. While you remain in this state, understanding it is virtually impossible. This is a very advanced level, so we won't delve into it deeply right now. What's crucial for us is to understand the state of unconsciousness, recognize the state of consciousness. This transition from unconsciousness to consciousness allows us to begin shaping our lives intentionally. Now, let's explore how our consciousness manifests, how it interacts with external objects, and the purpose of these external objects for our consciousness. Research has shown that our self-awareness, our sense of I am, cannot exist in isolation. This self-identification always relies on external objects. Without these external objects, the sense of I am simply does not exist because self-identification occurs through comparison with something else. There have been specific studies where individuals were placed in a completely white room where they could not see themselves, but could only perceive this white space. Over time, these individuals began to lose their grip on reality, gradually descending into madness because they were losing their self-identification. They were losing the sense of self-awareness. However, the moment a small black that was drawn in that white room, the self-identification process immediately resumed. The individual could then reassess their identity relative to that. What am I? Am I larger than this dot? Am I different in relation to this dot? The same phenomenon occurs when a person is placed in a soundproof room. There was a case where an individual was accidentally locked in such a room overnight, and by morning, he had lost his sanity because he had lost touch with himself to such an extent that he could no longer find his identity. These are documented facts known in psychology. Even in spiritual practices, self-identification is approached in a similar manner. For instance, in Buddhism, monks who struggle with detachment may be placed in isolated spaces, called chambers, where they receive food through channels and are deprived of light and sound. They spend extended periods in these dark, silent rooms to facilitate the process of detachment, as the ultimate goal in Buddhism is to achieve this state of non identification. This is a rather extreme method. However, it is possible to achieve detachment without resorting to such measures. I will discuss how to detach oneself while still maintaining a sense of self awareness. Therefore, it's crucial to understand that the external world is always tied to self identification, meaning I compare myself to those around me to establish my identity. What happens in this process? Distortion occurs. I refer to this as the crooked mirrors of the ego because my self identification relative to external objects always takes place through the filters of my ego, which invariably skew reality. The ego and the mind always justify our actions, distorting reality in the process. When I self assess without external objects, my mind always manipulates the facts, as self perception cannot occur without the prism of the ego. However, external reality presents the truth as it is, without the distortion of the ego. For example, imagine you're on a bus, lost in thought, and you let out an embarrassing sound. You might justify it by thinking, well, that wasn't very classy. But what if you're on that same bus and a well dressed woman next to you makes a similar sound? How would you react? You might think, what an inconsiderate person. In this scenario, you can easily justify your own actions but struggle to extend that same understanding to others. Consider a situation where your child misbehaves and you discipline them by smacking their hand in public. Or you observe another mother scolding and hitting her child in the park. Notice how differently you evaluate these two scenarios. You might justify your own actions, believing you did what was necessary, while viewing the other mother's behavior as harsh or inappropriate. Now think about a gathering at your home, where you and your partner get into a heated argument in front of your friends. Your ego will likely distort the situation, allowing you to justify your behavior. On the other hand, if you visit someone else's house and witness them yelling at each other, throwing insults back and forth, your perspective shifts again. You might feel uncomfortable or judgmental, seeing their actions as excessive. These examples illustrate how we perceive ourselves through the lens of our ego, which skews our self assessment, while external situations can reveal a clearer picture of reality. External objects and interactions allow us to view ourselves as we truly are, without the distortions of the ego, and to recognize our actions and lives more authentically. Without this perspective, understanding our true selves can be quite challenging. You might find yourself irritated by certain people, believing that you are gentle and kind. But this perception is your ego speaking, claiming you are soft and fluffy. The reality, reflected by those around you, reveals who you truly are, even if it's hard to accept. This can be uncomfortable to confront, but it's essential for self awareness. The most accurate measure of my character isn't what I think of myself, it's what external circumstances and people demonstrate to me. These reflections serve as a true mirror. Moreover, the closer the relationship, whether it's family, friends, or partners, the more accurate the reflection becomes. Think of it like the distance of a mirror. The further away the mirror is, the less accurate the reflection. Conversely, those closest to you provide the clearest insight into your true self. There's no more precise reflection than that of your partner, your children, and your family. Let's delve into how our subconscious communicates with our conscious mind. How does our subconscious convey what's happening beneath the surface? This process occurs through external objects and circumstances. I like to call it the whisper, shout, or even the wake up call of the subconscious. Many esoteric beliefs suggest that God communicates with us through certain situations, but we prefer to seek logical explanations rather than mystical ones. So, it's not a divine being sending us messages. Instead, it's our subconscious trying to bring awareness to our conscious mind, indicating that something is off. Perhaps we are heading in the wrong direction, thinking incorrectly, focusing on the wrong things, or desiring the wrong outcomes. For example, consider the image of a beggar. Our subconscious might use such visuals to alert us about our internal programs. In this way, our subconscious reveals to our conscious mind the active programs that influence us without our direct awareness. The subconscious communicates these messages through the external world and our circumstances because our conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg, while our subconscious is responsible for modeling our reality. It's not our conscious mind that shapes our reality. Rather, it's the programs residing in our subconscious. Therefore, it's crucial to learn how to interpret the information that our subconscious provides by directing our attention to specific external objects. In this way, we can communicate with our subconscious. The whisper of our subconscious manifests as random, emotionally low charged situations and images that we unintentionally notice in our distant and unfamiliar surroundings. These moments occur when something catches our eye, signaling a resonance. Our subconscious is trying to tell us that this observation is significant. These are hints from within. During my research, I engaged in extensive observation. For instance, while my wife and I were returning from meetings, we might hear arguments in one place, then encounter a confrontation between individuals elsewhere, or notice someone arguing at the back of the bus. We clearly understood that if we didn't become conscious of these experiences and address them, we would inevitably face a conflict at home with our children. Therefore, we developed techniques to shift our subconscious to different vibrations. This observation was confirmed through practice. The things that capture your attention often indicate the activation of certain subconscious programs. For example, you might be in a good mood while heading home, but if you're not careful, you may not realize that irritation is building up beneath the surface. If you witness a dispute on the bus, it can trigger those underlying programs, leading to a confrontation later on, as it operates almost automatically. Trust my words and put this to the test in your own life. The voice of our subconscious often manifests as recurring, emotionally charged, unpleasant images and situations involving other people and our distant surroundings. I have an example related to this inner voice. When I was studying at the psychology faculty, I had excellent relationships with my professors because I engaged with them frequently and enjoyed discussing various topics. They held me in high regard, and I often received passing grades automatically. One day, as I was on my way to either a final exam or submitting a paper, I suddenly heard a voice, loud and clear, as if someone was shouting in my ear, "You won't get anything for free from me. You be asterisk teach." I turned my head and saw two homeless individuals at the end of the platform arguing. My consciousness picked up that phrase from the chaos around me. I thought, what could this possibly mean? When I arrived to take my exam, it turned out that my regular professor was sick and an unfamiliar person was conducting the exam instead. Do you feel the irony? I couldn't help but laugh at how my subconscious, through the voice of an arguing stranger, had warned me that you won't get anything for free from me. As a result, I didn't pass the exam because I hadn't prepared for it. This is how our subconscious communicates with us, through its voice. A loud voice often manifests as highly engaging images and situations involving other people, transitioning to our close circle. For instance, when a friend calls you and says, "Ugh, inflation is killing me. I'm drowning in debt." It loudly reminds you that your own mindset about money is troubled, signaling that you may have slipped into a poverty mentality. This is when you receive a strong warning. You encounter reminders everywhere. Turn on the TV, ride the subway, and it's all about money troubles. This serves as a wake-up call to pay attention to your financial mindset. Next comes the shout, which is more of a warning. This can happen both internally and externally. If you don't take action to change your thinking, to step into consciousness or awareness, the next step could be a wake-up call or a harsh nudge from your subconscious. This could manifest as a health issue or some other significant problem if ignored. In this distant way, through our external environment, our subconscious communicates various glitches and issues in our consciousness. Whether it's ineffective thinking, unproductive emotional states, or the flawed functioning of our perception. All of this is reflected externally, showing us a clear picture without distortions. Let me emphasize some points and address your questions. The first point I want to draw your attention to is that what happens in your life exists within the limits of your attention. Consciousness perceives very little information. What does not fall within your focus essentially does not exist in your life. I gave you a metaphorical example of a tree falling. If you don't see or hear it, it doesn't exist for you. Indeed, many trees fall, but they do not exist for you. In other words, what lies beyond the limits of your attention does not exist for you. Your neighbor might be beating his wife and children behind the wall, but if you don't see or hear it, it doesn't exist for you. You could be lying on your couch just a meter away from it, gently stroking your child's head. Therefore, what reflects your reality is what falls within the scope of your attention. Don't think about starving children in Africa. Don't think about all the nonsense that has nothing to do with you and isn't happening in your life. Focus on what is occurring in your life, what falls within your attention. If you start to linger on news websites, reading articles, materials, and watching videos, consuming the informational garbage that is abundantly provided there, then that enters your field of attention. If something does not enter your field of attention, it does not exist in your life. That's the first point I want you to understand because many of you get confused about this. You might say, "What about this situation?" and mention some nonsense that has nothing to do with you. Once again, only what enters your field of attention matters. The flip side of this coin is that if something is not happening to you, but enters your field of attention, it becomes a part of your life. A war may not be happening to you, but if you're consuming it from social media, it becomes part of your life. This was very evident when the recent political situation started. I have many friends in Ukraine who are doing great, completely calm, and very adequately assessing the situation. They have a clear and clean mindset. It's pleasant to talk to them. However, there are many acquaintances in Russia whose minds are cluttered because they're consuming this informational garbage from social media and news, making it impossible to have a reasonable conversation with them. Once again, look at how this works. And reflection is what enters your field of attention. That is, events can occur but not enter your field of attention, and then they are not part of your life. You might not notice a homeless person who exists somewhere within a kilometer radius. Conversely, something may be happening far away from you and have nothing to do with you, but by focusing your attention on it, you make that event a part of your life. This is the first thing you need to clearly understand. The second point where you stumbled, and many had questions, the reflection shows what is in your psyche, not necessarily in your life. In other words, a reflection is not always events in your life. Don't try to translate the reflection directly. For example, you asked, alcoholism, but I don't drink, a homeless person, but I'm not homeless. A homeless person in the external world reflects a sense of homelessness in your psyche. Alcoholism in the external world reflects a dependency of your psyche, an escape from reality. Your dependency may manifest in a completely different way, non-alcoholic. Your escape from reality may manifest quite differently. Your sense of homelessness may manifest differently as well. But all of this exists in the psyche, so the reflection shows what is in your psyche. These are the two key points I wanted to draw your attention to. We have covered the part about consciousness. Let me summarize a bit, and then we will move on to the next part. Key points about consciousness that you should remember and understand. 1. How consciousness identifies with something surprise face. Consciousness can be in an identified or disidentified state. Consciousness can be identified with the body, desires, qualities, social roles, etc. too. What happens in your life is what is captured by your perception. 3. You can resonate with or not resonate with what is happening. 4. Both the conscious and unconscious levels can resonate. 5. Unconsciousness, consciousness, awareness. 6. How does consciousness communicate information? How to perceive resonances with the external world? How to see the information in them as resonances of the subconscious. I mentioned that someone might be shouting somewhere. You might not have this in your consciousness, but the subconscious resonates with it. 7. The reflection shows what is in your psyche, not necessarily what already exists in your life. These are the key points to take away from this block, to remember and fix for yourself. The principle of the mirror. Let's continue. This part will be dedicated to the mirror. We have discussed everything related to consciousness, and now we will explore how the mirror works. After this, we will examine the reverse reflection. I understand that what I will be talking about may provoke significant resistance because we are digging much deeper than what is commonly broadcast. But you will have the opportunity to listen to this again and again, and gradually it will settle and become clear. So let's move on to the question. How does the mirror work? There is a common interpretation of the mirror, which is used everywhere. I call it a one-sided interpretation. Everyone talks about it. The external is a reflection of me. However, this is such a superficial interpretation that it's difficult for people to understand how the external reflects me. When we were discussing consciousness, we actually broke it down. Many discussions about the concept of the mirror overlook an important point. Everything outside of us reflects not just our conscious mind, but also our subconscious. It reveals which programs are starting to activate in our subconscious or are already at work, even if we're not fully aware of them. We might think everything is different than it really is. We've touched on this earlier, so it should be clearer now. However, what we're about to discuss next is rarely mentioned. This is completely new information. When I realized this, it was a total mind blow. I refer to this as the paradox of double reflection. The second principle of the mirror states that everything outside of us is a reflection of what's within. But here's the catch. What's inside us is also a precise reflection of what's outside. Think about it. Not only is everything external a direct reflection of our inner self, but our perception of ourselves and our identity is also merely a reflection of the external world around us. This means that everything I perceive about myself is merely a reflection of the external world. Essentially, my self-perception is nothing more than an illusion of identity. We've talked about deepening our understanding of illusions, and this is where that understanding expands. My identity is illusory, as are my thoughts, perceptions, emotions, personality traits, social roles, desires, and even my body. All of this is embedded in us as social programs from the moment of conception. My father, through his sperm, passed biological and energetic informational programs to my mother's egg. While I was developing inside my mother, I was being programmed, absorbing all her reactions, thoughts, and feelings because we were intricately connected as one system. In essence, I was my mother. After birth, my environment continued to program me. Right now, I'm actually observing this with my granddaughter. I see how we program our children and grandchildren and how schools play a role in that. Back when my son was born, I even conducted an experiment with my kids. I strictly instructed my wife and mother-in-law not to react with panic when the child fell. You know how it is. When a child falls, they don't immediately start crying. They first look at the reactions of those around them. So, With my son, I experimented on his perception of pain. Whenever he fell, I would start laughing and encourage everyone to do the same. I'd say, "Come on, Oliver, you've got this." The paradox is that he could run full speed into a pole, and even when a bump appeared on his head, we would all be laughing, and he would rub the bump while still chuckling. Look at how deeply social programs and reflexes are embedded within us. This is our unconscious reaction. By modeling a child's responses, we can instill entirely different programs and reactions. My son, for instance, hardly perceives physical pain due to this upbringing. Everyone is amazed by this. He feels pain, but it's not a tragedy for him. It simply indicates that he did something wrong or ventured into a risky situation. He doesn't psychologically suffer from pain. He only experiences it physically, recognizing, okay, I shouldn't do that because it hurts. This is how our personalities get programmed. As we grow up, we start trying out all the programs embedded in our subconscious and filtering through them to see which ones work for us. Some programs get activated as we test them, while others are stored away in our subconscious and can be activated by our minds as needed. If we lack awareness, or at least conscious choice in changing these programs, our minds will automatically retrieve something from the subconscious, believing that it's the appropriate response. For example, if someone raises their voice, even though I'm a calm person, I might find myself shouting back to defend my position. These subconscious programs bubble up, and you might notice that this reaction doesn't align with your true nature. This is exactly how the mind pulls from the subconscious programs that were instilled in us since childhood, deciding that this is how we should respond. I think many of us have experienced situations where we reacted in ways that didn't feel true to ourselves. Bringing this together, we arrive at a fascinating conclusion that can be quite challenging for our conscious minds to accept. What I consider my identity, myself, is actually shaped by the influences of my upbringing and society. This can be clearly illustrated through the way different cultures and religions perceive the world, such as Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists. Each of these groups has a vastly different worldview, highlighting how our beliefs and values are deeply rooted in the social and cultural context we belong to. This phenomenon is strikingly illustrated by Tibetan monks, who often take in children from impoverished families unable to care for them. For these children, what are considered extraordinary abilities in the wider world, such as healing others or reading thoughts, become normal aspects of their existence. Growing up in an environment of enlightened monks shapes their perception, making skills like healing and heightened awareness seem ordinary. As a result, a child raised in a Tibetan monastery develops a personality that is vastly different from one shaped by mainstream society and its educational systems. This brings us back to the concept of mirrors reflecting one another, the illusions we encounter externally and the illusions that exist within ourselves. Reflect on this paradox of double reflection. This raises an essential question. Where do I fit into all this? If my internal landscape is filled with illusions, if my thoughts, automatic reactions, and desires are shaped by societal influences, like wanting a Mercedes or a fancy watch, then where's my true self? The paradox of the double mirror reveals that while the external world reflects who you are also a reflection of the external world. For many people, the more accurate description of their existence is that they are merely reflections of their environment. This happens unconsciously, meaning that until you reach a state of consciousness or awareness, you are just a mirror of what surrounds you. However, once you become conscious, the world begins to reflect you instead. In this sense, your true essence is consciousness itself, the part of you that can observe these reflections and intentionally manipulate the illusions. You have the power to consciously change and shape both your internal and external realities. Do you see? You become a conscious creator of your own identity and experiences. What does this mean for you? By changing the illusions within your inner mirror, you can transform the reflections in your outer mirror, thereby altering your external reality. This transformation hinges on your consciousness and its qualities, awareness and mindfulness. Only through awareness and mindfulness can you truly express your authentic self. When you use these qualities to observe the illusions reflected in the external mirror, you gain the clarity needed to diagnose which internal illusions require change. I recognize that this topic is quite complex and that you may not have encountered this concept of a mirror before. It can be challenging to understand and accept that your personality is, in fact, a significant illusion. But I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on this and listen again if you need to. What should you take away from this section? Both you and the world act as mirrors. Initially, you are a complete reflection, a consequence of the external world. Gradually, as you take the right steps, you become conscious, and the external world transforms into a consequence of you. As we discussed at the beginning, the mirror principle operates always and everywhere. The only question is, what is the cause and what is the effect? So, why do many people struggle to utilize the mirror principle for their own benefit? It's because they attempt to control the object while still being a reflection of that object. Imagine your reflection in a mirror trying to manipulate you. That scenario only exists in cases of severe psychological disorder. That's why people struggle to make this work. How can you influence the original if you are merely a reflection? This describes the reality for most people. When a person is in an unconscious state, torn between various self identifications and identifications with others, and reacts from these identifications, they are just a reflection. The beliefs, worldview, value systems, and roles that have been imposed on them dictate their responses. They exist as a mishmash of all the information packed into them, and their reactions stem from this. In essence, a person reflects the external world and is a product of it. Most people are merely reflections of the external world. The mirror principle operates. It's just that no one has explained how it can work to their benefit. Everything you've read about the mirror principle is true, but there's always an important nuance that is overlooked. Yes, everything reflects everything, but what is the original object and what is the reflection? Initially, you are a reflection. You have no influence on the world. You simply reflect the consequences of what has been ingrained in you. Beliefs, values, and social conditioning dictate your actions. As you gradually develop consciousness, you gain the ability to influence the world through this mirror. You start to become the original source, and the world begins to reflect you. I'm not suggesting that you can entirely change everything with a single thought. Rather, as your awareness grows, you become less of a consequence of the external world and more of a source from which the external world reflects. This shift allows for a greater impact on your reality, transforming the relationship between you and your surroundings. This is quite a complex concept. If you haven't thought about it before, it will take some time for it to sink in and for you to start seeing it in your life. However, begin by observing the people around you. It's often easier to spot the logs in others' eyes. Look at how they manifest this reflection, how others serve as mirrors of their immediate environment and the circumstances they find themselves in. Once you do this, you'll begin to notice it in yourself. You'll start to recognize moments when you feel the external world impacting you and how that influence affects your experiences. As your awareness grows, you'll increasingly be able to influence the external world as a reflection. Utilizing the mirror principle and the concept of double reflection, this is what you should take away from this section on mirrors. Next, we'll delve into reverse reflection. But let me emphasize, the mirror principle and the technique of reverse reflection only work if you have a solid understanding of how consciousness and the double mirror operate, and if you can manage your consciousness effectively. Once you master that, you won't have many questions about reverse reflection, as it will become clear and straightforward. The most challenging part has been what we've covered so far. The concept of reverse reflection is relatively easier to grasp. Introduction to reverse reflection. Consider that every person inherently possesses a potential for creativity in a broad sense. This creativity involves the ability to change and influence the external world in various ways. However, this potential is often packaged in a dormant state. Most individuals exist in a realm of complete unawareness, unconsciousness, and automatic behavior, as we discussed earlier. Looking at human development throughout history, we can see varying levels of consciousness across different eras. For instance, in European society during the Middle Ages, there was significantly less awareness and more dogmatism and automatism. Over time, the number of individuals who begin to engage their minds and become conscious of their surroundings has steadily increased. This trend reflects a gradual shift toward greater awareness across the ages. Now, when we consider an individual throughout their life, they possess a potential for consciousness that initially exists in a state of unconsciousness and automatic reaction. Essentially, a person absorbs the external world. What they take in shapes who they become. However, despite being a reflection of the external world, every person has the potential for creativity and consciousness. How does this potential manifest? For some, this potential is apparent, and they have the means to express it at any moment. For others, it remains dormant. They simply go through life on autopilot without much thought. So, how does this potential for consciousness emerge? Any form of unconsciousness provides fertile ground for the development of consciousness and awareness. Consider this idea. For a person to gain consciousness and possibly awareness, they must first experience unconsciousness. Consciousness and awareness cannot exist in a vacuum. They require an opposite state. Therefore, in every moment of unawareness, in any situation where you act on autopilot, you are both a product of that automatism and a consequence of the world around you. Paradoxically, this same situation offers the best opportunity for your consciousness to evolve. It may seem complex, but if you grasp this concept, it can be profoundly enlightening. Many people who have achieved a conscious state of awareness often do so as a result of intense stress. In fact, when I asked if anyone has ever acted on autopilot while fully aware of what was happening, essentially observing themselves from a distance, you all acknowledge that you have experienced this. Almost all of these situations arise from some form of external stress. Sometimes the pressure of stress can be so overwhelming that it triggers a deeper shift into awareness, rather than just a fleeting moment of clarity. The more unconscious and stressful a situation is, the more conducive it becomes for enhancing your consciousness and awareness. This addresses the transition. How do we move from being mere reflections to something more? This process isn't critical for immediate understanding, but if you're curious, it provides a direction for your contemplation. Now, let's move on to the technique of reverse reflection. Once you've trained yourself to break free from autopilot mode into a conscious state, you can apply the technique of reverse reflection from that foundation. It's important to note that while awareness as a state of consciousness is not strictly necessary for working with reverse reflection, it certainly helps. In a state of awareness, you won't encounter issues with reflections. However, achieving that state of awareness is more complex and can be challenging. Therefore, we will focus on the more practical level of moving from unconsciousness to consciousness. Let's recap. You've moved into a state of consciousness, learning to cultivate awareness during challenging situations when something triggers you. It's in this conscious state that you'll apply the technique of reverse reflection. Without this foundation, reverse reflection holds no real meaning and won't work. Otherwise, it's just pretty words that some people use to bolster their identity as spiritual individuals, but that's about it. For the technique to be effective, you need to have gone through this preparatory work, which we've spent the majority of our time on. This serves as an introduction to reverse reflection because it's crucial for you to grasp this concept well and avoid the trap many fall into. Trying to apply the principle of the mirror while still operating on autopilot without having reached a conscious state. When that happens, all you get are superficial antics and empty gestures. Now let's delve into reverse reflection, how to cultivate the right mindset and execute the technique effectively. Now let's get straight to the principle of the mirror. For the technique of reverse reflection to be effective, you need to 1. Activate your anti-blame mode and keep it turned on constantly. Stop blaming others for your circumstances. 2. Internalize the law of response as deeply as possible and let it guide your actions. 3. Transition from autopilot to consciousness. This step is essential. 4. If you're struggling to understand what your reflections are trying to show you, don't hesitate to seek help from professionals. Sometimes even family members can provide insights if you maintain open communication. It's important to reach out to others because, at times, you may not fully grasp the situation on your own. 5. Remember that different people reflect various parts and programs of your subconscious, often referred to by psychologists as subpersonalities. This means that one person may shout at you while another treats you kindly, and both can coexist because they reflect different programs that can be activated simultaneously. 6. It may be the same program expressed in different ways. For instance, if you find that everyone around you is constantly yelling, some may shout while others express pity. This reflects the same internal victim state. Some people pity the victim while others lash out at them. Essentially, the same program is at play, but the reactions from different people vary. 7. Different individuals can showcase various programs in your subconscious because just like a computer can run multiple programs at once, your subconscious can have several active programs. Therefore, different people will reflect different aspects of your inner self. Therefore, it's essential to prepare your consciousness by transitioning into a state of awareness. Once you achieve this state, the technique of reverse reflection will work automatically. The very first step is to enter a state of awareness. We can introduce an intriguing technique called mind games. We believe in approaching techniques not as burdensome obligations, like I have to do this, but rather as enjoyable games with the mind. One of these games focuses on achieving awareness. What makes these techniques remarkable is that, unlike other methods for entering a state of consciousness, such as meditation or self analysis, you can engage in mind games anywhere and anytime on the bus, in the subway, at work, or even in the restroom. There's no need for special conditions like solitude, silence, or deep trance. You can simply play a fun game with your mind. By simply engaging in this game, you can radically transform your consciousness, yourself, and your life. This transformation requires stepping out of the automatic responses to external stimuli. You can only achieve this shift by not reacting on autopilot, but instead continually asking yourself a few simple questions. These questions help bring all the information you experience and express into the display of your consciousness, allowing you to become aware by asking, what's happening right now? Where am I? What am I feeling? What thoughts are in my mind? At first, this may seem challenging. However, it's much like learning to drive a car. It feels difficult initially, but as you gain experience, it becomes second nature, and the process becomes smooth and easy. By playing with your mind instead of engaging in serious or arduous practices, you'll find it enjoyable. Through this fun and engaging game, you'll quickly and effortlessly achieve meaningful results. So, start playing with your mind by asking yourself simple questions like, what am I thinking right now? What images are in my mind? Are these images helpful to me? What am I seeing right now? What is the focus of my perception? What am I experiencing? What's currently on the display of my consciousness? Is what I'm paying attention to effective for me? What beliefs am I currently following? What am I expressing and creating with my words? What am I feeling right now? What state am I in? Are these feelings effective and beneficial for me? How am I interacting with the world and other people? What qualities of my personality are being expressed? Are these effective and useful for me? Should I consider changing my behavior or how I interact with others? What impulses and desires am I experiencing? Are these desires and impulses effective for my life? Are they beneficial to me? What is my body currently feeling and sensing? Is this effective and beneficial for me? By consistently asking yourself these simple questions, you will train your ability to analyze in the background. This practice will give you the power of choice, the ability to select effective models of thinking, perception, and ways to respond effectively to external stimuli. A common question we receive is, how long should I play these games and apply this technique? Our answer is simple. Continue until you notice that it has become automatic for you and you find that you are always conscious. But when this happens, you won't want to stop this engaging, fun, and fascinating game. That's the paradox. Let's move on to the technique of reverse reflection. What does it involve in everyday practice? First, we go into our inner mirror and ask ourselves, what is this reflecting? For example, if everyone around you says there's not enough money and that we're in a crisis, what does that reflect? It reflects a mindset of scarcity. Another example, I'm working like a horse. This indicates a lack of joy in life. Often, this is mirrored by children or partners who seem unmotivated or unwilling to make any progress, suggesting that you're living without joy and lacking the drive to move forward. It's essential to focus on the presence of joy and enjoyment in your life. Additionally, we mentioned that a person might fear life, while their partner might cope by drinking for them. There's also a common issue where a woman starts to drain all the finances. What does this signify? It reflects a lack of structure regarding money and a scarcity mindset. A helpful technique for this is the scales technique. When you're unsure about what something reflects, you can weigh it out. We often say, weigh it out. Is there too much or too little of this? You can ask yourself, what is triggering the reaction in the other person? What is provoking the recurring situations in my life and reality? It's essential to assess this on your metaphorical scales. If you're unsure whether you have a lot of this quality or very little, you can ask yourself, am I this or am I the opposite of this? Am I similar or am I fighting against it? There's another profound issue many people face. I want this, but I don't allow myself to have it. This internal conflict often creates a strong emotional response. For instance, you might say, I really desire this, but my moral and ethical beliefs are preventing me from pursuing it. Another key piece of advice is to avoid getting too deep into analyzing and excavating family patterns. Many people love to get caught up in questions like, what is this family pattern? What does it mean for me? Instead, I recommend quickly shifting your focus to what you want. When something irritates or triggers you, do a quick analysis and then move on to questions like, what do I truly desire? Or how do I need to change for my external situation to improve? Remember the principle of focus. What you pay attention to gains power and energy. If you concentrate on problems, they tend to multiply because you're empowering them. So try not to dwell too long in analysis. Instead, transition swiftly to what you want. Personally, I rarely analyze anymore. I immediately model what I desire. Helpful phrases to use include, how wonderful it would be. I love the idea that. I really enjoy when. This mindset develops with experience. Initially, it's essential to analyze and recognize what in the present is provoking that reflection. Let's recap the stages to ensure everything is clear in your mind. First, you need to check that you've learned to enter a state of consciousness, at least locally. Andrew provided fantastic mental techniques for achieving this. If you're unsure how to attain consciousness in various situations, Start practicing these techniques. He shared numerous examples of the questions you should ask yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed. Create a list for yourself, including: what am I thinking right now? What do I see around me? What beliefs am I operating under? What's happening in my body at this moment? What desires am I experiencing? I have some signature insights on the topics of consciousness and unawareness. First off, how can you tell if you're truly conscious or not? Here's my go to method. If something's happening that you really don't like, it's a sign that you're operating in a state of unawareness. You might think you're doing great, but often the reaction is something like, he's the one who's unaware, or she's totally out of it. You know, the classic, I'm the hero and everyone else is clueless mindset. This attitude is a red flag, indicating that you're the one struggling with awareness. If someone is behaving in a way you find frustrating, it usually reflects your own lack of awareness first and foremost. When you're truly conscious, these kinds of problems simply don't arise. So, consider this your diagnostic tool for assessing your current state of mind. I also had a favorite phrase that worked wonders for me. Is what's happening right now what I really want or not? This question is one of the most effective tools for self assessment. First, it serves as a diagnostic check. Then, it leads to the pivotal question: what do I actually want? This inquiry often acts as a turning point, helping you shift from an automatic, zombie like state into a more constructive mindset. It's incredibly beneficial for gaining clarity and direction. Main task: practice these techniques regularly. This way, you're training your consciousness. Make it a goal to intentionally step into awareness when you need to, rather than waiting for it to happen under pressure. This is the first and most crucial task. The application of the technique of reverse reflection is secondary, as it becomes much easier when you are consciously aware. The technique of reverse reflection. So, what do? You look outward, your external mirror, and identify what bothers you emotionally. This ties back to the question: is what's happening what I truly want? You analyze what you see in the outside world. Remember, it's important to analyze not just the direct situation, e.g., my partner is drinking, but also to explore how that situation makes you feel, what emotions arise, what thoughts come to mind, and how you react. If you simply write down a situation without context, it may not accurately reflect your internal state, as it would just be a bare fact. The real insight comes from understanding your emotions, reactions, and thoughts related to the situation. That gives you the complete picture. So, we observe and know what's happening externally. That's the first step. Step two, the internal mirror. Now, you move to your internal mirror. You ask yourself, what does this reflect? After observing what's happening externally, it's time to look within and consider: what in me is being reflected this way? I introduced you to the weighing technique. You can ask yourself, do I have a lot of this within me or just a little? For instance, if you encounter aggression from others and you realize that you also feel aggressive, perhaps you've been suppressing that part of yourself. You might think, I really want to lash out, but I've been holding it back. On the other hand, if you find you have little of that aggression, it may lead to an entirely different issue: a sense of struggle. Some qualities might be minimal within you, and you don't care about them at all, while others might annoy you, prompting you to fight against them. To help clarify this, consider these additional questions. Am I like this? Or am I the opposite? Meaning, do I embody this trait? Or am I actively trying to resist it? Another helpful perspective is, I want this, but I'm not allowing myself to have it. Recognizing the traits you possess is often easier, even if it's uncomfortable. However, noticing when you're fighting against qualities you lack can be more challenging. That's why we provide these extra tools to aid in your self discovery. We're not just analyzing the external situation, we're also examining your internal reaction. Once you complete this analysis, the third step is the process of reverse reflection. This involves changing your internal reflections, behaviors, attitudes, and thoughts, all of which need to be transformed from within. Once you do this, you'll notice that things begin to change externally as well. The key takeaway is that this last step of change tends to happen quite naturally. It requires minimal effort on your part. The real effort comes beforehand, when you need to consciously step into a mindful state in response to something that triggers you. From that state of awareness, you analyze the situation using your internal mirror, and then you can apply the process of reverse reflection. This is what I've emphasized throughout this book. The act of reflection becomes straightforward when you've done the foundational work. That's the technique, and now you know how to implement it. Summary of the reverse reflection technique. Key steps for practicing the reverse reflection technique. 1. Cultivate mindfulness. Practice stepping into a state of awareness using the techniques we've shared. 2. Apply reverse reflection. Once you're in a mindful state, engage in the reverse reflection process, surprise face. External mirror. Look outward to identify what triggers you. Know what's happening and what emotions it stirs. Oh, internal mirror. Ask yourself, what does this reflect about me? Am I similar to this situation, or am I fighting against it? Do I have an abundance of this trait, or is it lacking? Am I embodying this, or am I resisting it? 3. Reverse reflection. Transform your internal reflections by altering your behaviors, attitudes, thoughts, and feelings. As you do this, you'll notice changes in your external reality as well. Additional techniques for emotional release and situational change. I want to share some additional techniques that I've personally used and found effective for emotional release and changing situations. These techniques are designed to help the reverse reflection process work more smoothly and can be applied on the go. 1. The power of forgiveness. Often, when we observe irritability or conflict in others, people arguing, for instance, it's a reflection of our own unresolved emotions. To alter these subconscious programs, we can employ forgiveness techniques. 2. Ho'oponopono technique. One powerful method is the Ho'oponopono technique, a Hawaiian practice for cleansing and elevating vibrational energy. When you encounter a challenging situation, simply repeat these phrases. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. While these phrases may seem simple, they have the profound ability to transform your mindset. They help clear away the emotional clutter and aggression that accumulate in our subconscious from our environment. The influence of vibrations and protective prayers, as you may recall, vibrations have a profound impact on us. Your own vibrations of calmness, joy, and serenity can be powerful. But if you find yourself in an environment saturated with anger and negativity, those stronger vibrations can influence you. To avoid absorbing the vibrations of anger, resentment, and irritation, there are 4 phrases that can help protect you on a psychological level. My spouse and I have found these techniques to be very effective. 1. The power of prayer. For those who appreciate prayer, there is a technique known as the prayer of forgiveness and cleansing. One particularly effective method comes from the teachings of Sergei Lazarev, known as the triple prayer of forgiveness. When you encounter a difficult situation or have strained relationships with someone, you can reflect on this before bedtime and recite the following. First step, divine power, God, the absolute, higher consciousness. Please forgive me for being the cause of negative emotions and vibrations directed at me by this person. Second step, divine power. Forgive me for expressing negative emotions and vibrations towards this person. Third step, higher power. Please forgive us for being foolish and unreasonable, cluttering this space with our negative vibrations. In this process, you essentially ask for forgiveness for being a catalyst for another person's negative vibrations. You acknowledge your own contribution to the negativity, recognizing that you, too, may have vibrated with those negative emotions. By invoking a higher power, you seek to annul these vibrations, admitting, we are just unwise children, and we unconsciously project such emotions into the world on autopilot. This humble approach not only helps to cleanse your own energy, but also creates a ripple effect, fostering healing in your relationships and the environment around you. To avoid making this purely religious, let's consider the purpose of prayer. What does prayer do? When we focus on a particular idea or thought, we can shift ourselves away from negative vibrations and harmonize our own energies to a higher frequency. Prayer isn't just about religion, it's about self improvement and enhancing our own well being. When people pray, their state of mind often changes, helping them access higher levels of positive energy. This technique can be very beneficial for anyone looking to cultivate a more positive mindset. Another technique I use is sending gratitude and love to others, as well as what they might be lacking at that moment. Since this energy comes through you, your own state changes automatically, helping to close off any aggressive or unwanted programs. When you send positive impulses towards something that irritates you, remember that at a quantum level, we are all interconnected. This person reflects something within you, so your wishes are more for yourself than for them. For example, if I see someone struggling, I might say, I wish for you to find abundance and for others to care for you. I hope you find understanding. If I notice a misunderstanding between two people, I might say, I wish for you both to communicate well, to express your thoughts harmoniously, and to understand each other. The key is that when you wish something for someone else, it must pass through you first. This process transforms your psyche and subconscious, creating a more positive mindset. These simple techniques work wonders. When you apply them while staying in a conscious state and analyze what your attention is focused on, you can eliminate the effects of negative vibrations. For instance, when my partner and I began using these techniques, we noticed conflict and irritation everywhere. However, when we got home, instead of arguments, we had calm discussions about how to handle situations constructively. This shift occurred without drama or outbursts. By retraining your psyche for constructive engagement, you can proactively adjust your external mirror. This happens as you change your mental state and fill your consciousness with positive energy. Let me add a bit more about analyzing situations, specifically the technique of recurring reflections. It's quite useful for analyzing repeating patterns in your life. When something happens just once, it might be hard to grasp what it reflects or how to interpret it. However, when a situation recurs, you have the opportunity to observe it over time and notice its dynamics. As you notice a repeating situation, you can immediately think about what it reflects about you. It doesn't have to be a brief moment, it can be an ongoing pattern. Recognizing these patterns can provide deeper insights into your inner state and help you understand the underlying beliefs or emotions driving these experiences. Another technique is the splinter in someone else's eye. It's often easier to analyze the behaviors of those around you first. As you know, self analysis can be more challenging. So, when you're starting to train your skill of recognizing reflections, it can be helpful to begin by observing others. I'm sure you won't have any trouble with this approach. Another recommendation is to simply observe and take note of the reflections when you find it challenging to understand them, especially in prolonged situations. I have an internal mantra that goes, I don't quite understand what this is about yet, but I see that it's there. This happens to me quite often, and it applies not only to reflections, but to all aspects of consciousness. Sometimes you might encounter chronic unconsciousness, and in such cases, I just observe it while reminding myself that I haven't yet grasped its significance. Over time, as you continue to observe this chronic unconsciousness, you will gradually dissolve it and come to understand what it entails. It's completely normal, and there's no need to panic about it. Some issues have deeply rooted connections, and you won't be able to see them immediately. Observation is a universal tool that effectively dissolves any form of unconsciousness and automatic responses, guiding you toward understanding what you truly need to see in a given situation. By simply observing without judgment, you create space for awareness to emerge, allowing insights to surface naturally. This practice can help you break free from habitual patterns and uncover deeper truths about yourself and your interactions with the world. Let me add some insights about situations. Instead of dissecting each one, I'll focus on the common patterns that emerge. There are several questions in the chat that fall into a similar category. These include inquiries like, if I don't allow myself something, how do I move into acceptance? And if my mom reacts aggressively and I find aggression in myself, it seems I'm fighting it. I need to stop fighting aggression and accept that it exists. The core issue here is the prohibition of certain feelings or responses within yourself, which is a complex topic that requires time to unpack, potentially months of work. When we say, I'm fighting this, it indicates that we are resisting reality. Specifically, we're resisting the existence of aggression. Fighting against aggression is pointless because it's a part of the world around us. It simply exists. By resisting it, you are denying its presence, which creates more conflict within. If you stop resisting reality and cease to fight against aggression, it won't disappear. It will still exist in the world. However, it will no longer have a personal impact on you. Even if someone directs aggressive behavior towards you, it may catch your attention, but it won't provoke a reaction within you. Ultimately, this helps it fade from your awareness over time. I've observed this in myself with various emotions. For example, let's consider resentment. For a while, I noticed that people were holding grudges against me. When I stopped fighting it and removed the mirror aspect of the situation, things gradually changed. At first, people would resent me and I felt indifferent. Eventually, they stopped feeling resentful altogether because it just didn't make sense anymore. The same principle applies to all similar situations. They persist as long as you resist accepting what already exists. You need to dig deeper in this direction. There's another layer of work I want to share with you. All situations that fall into the categories of I'm fighting this, I don't allow reality to be as it is, or I don't let other people be the way they behave. If you dig deeper, they ultimately stem from not allowing yourself to be who you are and not accepting your internal reality. If you frequently find yourself dissatisfied with the external world, it indicates that you're not permitting the world to be as it is, which reflects your own unwillingness to accept who you truly are. When someone says, I'm this way, and I don't like it, it's often a manifestation of fighting against the reality of their true self. I believe I've shared more than enough information for now. With such an abundance of new and unusual insights, your mind might be feeling overwhelmed. What I really want is for you to start applying what you've heard in practice, stepping into awareness and analysis yourself. Only through practice will you gradually, even if it means making mistakes at first, begin to discern what a situation is reflecting back to you. This understanding comes only with experience. It won't happen immediately, but as you keep practicing, you'll find that you won't need to exert effort to change anything externally. You will change something within yourself through the principle of the mirror effect, and the outside world will transform in remarkable ways. It truly feels miraculous. I remember spending a long time trying to teach my partner how to spend money consciously. I would argue, and nothing seemed to work. It wasn't until I applied the principle of the mirror effect that I was able to help her become aware and manage her finances wisely. It happened only when I reflected on myself, examining why these issues arose, how they were happening, where I was wasting resources, and which resources I neglected. Once I addressed these aspects within myself, a miracle occurred. My partner's relationship with money changed dramatically. So, it works incredibly well, but only when you practice. Gradually, it will become easier and easier, and you'll find yourself living most of your life in a state of awareness, allowing you to shape your life the way you want. In an unconscious state, which most people on this planet experience, it's nearly impossible to create something comfortable and high quality for yourself. What I want to emphasize is to apply these concepts in practice. Gain experience, refine your skills, and become masters of this approach. I'm giving you tools that truly work, so all you need to do is practice. Thank you for listening to this book. I also appreciate your questions, as they were essential in creating this product. Because of your engagement, I was able to craft this message. With what I've shared, you have the power to change your life and make it what you desire. Wishing you all the best.